Okay. So actually, last time that we did this, we covered the second half of chapter 1 and the whole of chapter 2. So today we're gonna do chapter 3, and we're gonna reference a little bit back to chapter 1 and 2. Okay. And you're all with me?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great. So we're using the Aryeh Kaplan. I'm also going to be using the Sefer, particularly not so much for the translation as much as for the commentary for the Vilna Gaon, the Gra. He has a very solid commentary on the Sefer Yetzirah. The reason why I like it is Lurianic, but it's also the Vilna Gaon's particular style is just to kind of be very focused on the on understanding the text from within other texts, but particularly within the text of the Sefer Yetzirah itself. Meaning, he's obviously knows every word of the Sefer Yetzirah by heart, so he keeps referencing which paragraph is explaining an earlier paragraph or will be explained later. So that's, to me, that style of explaining the Sefer Yetzirah is simple and effective. And he did it pretty well. Of course, he still does it's not just that. He's not just explaining the Sefer Yetzirah from within. He is using the Lurianic Kabbalah to explain it as well. But let's start out off page 139 if you are following chapter 3 in the Aryeh Kaplan. So Shalosh Imot, aleph, mem, shin. 3 mothers. Those are the 3 letters of the aleph, mem, and shin, which were mentioned in chapter 1 and in chapter 2. Yisod and kaf zchut v'kaf chova v'lashon chok machria b'intayim. Their foundation is a pan of merit and a pan of negativity or liability. Again, the pan is a reference to a weight system, a scale that has a pan on either side, and then the tongue of decree deciding between them. In other words, that's the middle, the center of the pan, which creates the balance between the sides and it mediates between them. So if we look back at chapter 2, if you, for example, in the in the edition that Sefer has for the Sefer Yetzirah, he actually just says, Mishna Zuk Fula Le'el Reish Perak Beis. This Mishnah is a repetition of what already came in the beginning of chapter 2. B'derech Agav, there it was just kind of coincidental, like it's not primary. V'kan Iker Mikoma. Here is its primary place. So he basically says this in the opening of chapter 2. And there, the context that he wants to introduce is the idea of the letter mem is domamot. The mem is a silent or perhaps a soft humming sound. And then the shin is a hissing sound, like a shrieking sound, soraket. And the aleph, is the air. and mediating between them. But it has all of the other words are in that. The it begins with a breakdown of the 22 letters of the alphabet, and then it focuses on the shalosh imot, aleph mem shin yisod and kav sod kav kova, chok machriya ben time, just like we said in our Mishnah. And then it goes back into the 22 letters and breaks down the 22 letters into the 5 parts of how we pronounce words, so to speak. And that's what we did the last time we met and did Sefer Yetzirah. The Reish Lamed Aleph Sha'arim. Okay, so now we're going to go deeper into this idea of the aleph, mem, and shin. The overall theme of what we're going to do is we're now going to be translating how these letters, which are also, we mentioned in the end of chapter 1, correspond to the Yud and the Hey and the Vav, 3 of the 4 letters of the Tetragrammaton, the 4-letter name of God, the Yud Ke Vav Ke, are based on the aleph, mem, and shin. That means that David Newton is calling. Zeb, do you want to call? Just text David how to get on.
Sure.
Yeah. So what that means, and the commentaries talk about how we could be understanding is as the Sefer Yetzirah goes deeper into the explanations of the 22 letters, and particularly today of the 3 mothers, the aleph, mem, shin, is that it's parallel to the kind of Lurianic creation of the world, where you first have the lights and the vessels are not as defined, in the sense of that the lights, the vessels are not able to hold it together. And out of that lack of stability comes the what we call the breaking of the vessels. And then after the vessels have broken, there's the beginning of the world of tikkun, so to speak, a more stable or ability to reconfigure the partsufim. So that's one way, and Aryeh Kaplan, another he's bringing down earlier commentaries that say, well, we could kind of read that the earlier stages that had been mentioned already in Sefer Yetzirah of the 3 mothers, in contrast to the mentioned now, were like earlier stages of the or before they became stabilized in the world of tikkun. I actually want to suggest it could be just the opposite, or a third way, which they could both be right. It's not about what comes before or after. But the opposite approach would be that in this chapter, we're now heading towards explaining how the science of time and space correlate to the letters. Now, if we understand that the letters have a significance in that they are creative, and they are, it would almost be like the equivalent of some scientific fact. The scientific fact would then dictate how it would manifest in the world. In other words, if there is some type of science, of physics, once that is applied in real time, you could then talk about existence, how the principles of physics are applied in terms of actual reality that we experience. So that's the way I would like to learn it. Is first, they're very theoretical. They're not really actualized. But the truth is, as soon as the principles are there, but then they become pronounced and they become actualized. And we're going to see how he relates, the author of the Sefer Yetzirah, whoever it was, relates the energies of the aleph, mem, and shin, and to the creation of the what he calls what we call the four seasons of winter, spring, summer, and fall, from these three letters. You'll see why it's three and not four. There's one season that is appearing twice. Spring and fall are part of the same kind of idea of the aleph, the mediation between hot and cold. Okay, so we're going to come up with the heat and the fire and the water and the air, which is the energies associated with these three letters, and the seasons that we're talking about. Also within the human body, it sounds like kind of like Chinese medicine, where they talk about hot and cold and dry and wet, but it's part of our tradition also, not the way it is the Chinese, but in our own way. And again, sounds very Greek, the idea of these four basic elements, and to a modern scientifically minded person might sound like, why bother with the science of 2,500 years ago when we have a much better understanding of science today? And that would be a valid concern if you were trying to launch a space shuttle using the numbers from the Sefer Yetzirah. But if you're using the Sefer Yetzirah as a esoteric text, want to learn it and meditate on it or just understand it, that's fine. So, okay, I'm not really going to explain so much about the first one. It'll explain itself as we've been showing in its continuation. So we're going to go to the second Mishnah. It's on page 140. Unless does anyone have any questions on the first Mishnah? Anyone? I'll tell you what, we'll do the second Mishnah, and if you have a question after we do the second Mishnah on the first or second Mishnah, let you know. I'll stop for those as well. Okay, so Mishnah 2, page 140 in the Aryeh Kaplan. And again, I was mentioning before, we're really indebted to Aryeh Kaplan for his translation and commentary. In fact, I was just mentioning that many of the people who are giving lectures online, at least on the Sefer Yetzirah, they're basically, whether they acknowledge it, some of them don't even acknowledge it. They're basically, almost all of them are pretty much just the ones that I've heard, for the most part, we're basically just sharing things they read from Aryeh Kaplan without always acknowledging where they got it from. So we're indebted to him for this translation and commentary. So Sholosh Imos Aleph Mem Shin Sod Gadol Mufla Mechusa V'Chasum B'Shesh Tabaot B'Yatz Mehem Avir Mayim Eish Mehem Noldu Avot Ma'avot Toldot. So again, the three mothers are Aleph, Mem, and Shin. And I neglected to talk about it, that you go back to part 2 of this series, all right, which is online. It's on Facebook, it's on YouTube now. And I do talk about a little bit what's in the aleph and what's in the mem and the shin that makes them special. And you could look at it. Aryeh Kaplan has nice stuff on that. That's in chapter 1, when he first brings them up. I believe it was in chapter 1. It's definitely the beginning of chapter 2. Chapter 2, Mishnah 1 of chapter 2, you can look that up to see what's up with these 3 letters. Okay. Yeah, so it's mostly going to be in chapter 2. Okay. So you've got this Sod Gadol Mufla Mechusa. It's a big secret. So it's different expressions of what the secret is, right? Sod Gadol, big secret. Mufla, which means like Pella is wonderment, like amazement. Chusa is concealment. So you could analyze whether they're just kind of semantics, trying to say it's really a secret, or if there's elements of distinction in these descriptions of what the secret is. And I would tend to believe it's the second, although I'm not going to try to decipher what they each are. And the commentaries talk about the differences in these various secrets. But if you look at the next 2 words, 3 words, chasum b'sheish tabaot, it's sealed within 6 rings. Now that's very specific. That's not just saying mufla, mchusa, amazement or wow, or hidden. No, that's saying there are 6 distinct signets. Now, how do you understand a ring? So one way of understanding a ring is he quotes Aryeh Kaplan, says the obvious ring would be the ring of Achashverosh, because like in the story of the Megillah, it says the decree that was sealed with the signet of the ring of the king can't be retracted. Like it becomes like the law. So usually what that means is that they would I guess use hot wax, and the signet ring would somehow go into the wax. Maybe there would be kind of the equivalent of a piece of paper that was folded that would be sealed with the signet ring, the wax of the signet ring of the king, which gave it this official title. Now, what that would then mean, I made the bracha before, and we were just on Zoom. What that would represent, because we know that the king, so to speak, in the story, Achashverosh is also an allusion to the Ribono Shel Olam, to the master of the world. So this idea of the seal of the king represents something that is created and yet covered over. Okay, and there's 6 of them. Now, what's the 6th? The obvious explanation for the 6th, before you get fancy, is just to refer back to what he already said about the 6th. And that's where I mentioned before, we'll just look at the Pirush Hagra, the Vilna Gaon's commentary, because he just quotes the text itself to explain itself. Okay, so what does the Gra say? The Gra says, that if you want to break this down, that by the time you get to the six, it's a reference to what he said, that they're the shishak savot, right? The six directions, which are really the dimensions of space: north, south, east, west, up and down. And that also is a reference to the aleph, mem, shin being as like three letters build six homes. The configuration of how to move around the letters within the aleph, mem, and shin. And what that is that three becomes six, six permutations, which become what we call the six directions. And okay, I'm leaving out other things the Vilna Gaon says, which are Lurianic but beautiful, and fit into the text quite well, which explains how they fit into the Yud and the He and the Vav of God's name and into the Sfirot.
But Rabbi, doesn't he,
Yes.
surely the obvious question would be that if he takes the six, that he has to tie them into the Zeh and Pin, which are the six Sphira between Hesed and Yesod.
Correct. So we actually did that last time. I wish it was last week, but last week was Pesach. I had my son's wedding. So it was quite a long time ago, but our last Sefer Yetzirah session, we actually talked about this exact thing, David, about how the challenge and the Gra, the Arizal and the Zohar actually, fitting in what the six are, and it's actually in, rather than go through it, I'll just tell you where to look it up. It's in the chart. It's in the end of chapter 1, where he breaks down the six directions, and then he has various charts there. It's actually what page is it? I'm looking for it. Maybe not so much the end, more like the middle. Yeah, it's the middle of chapter 1. Looks like it is on page 46, table 10. Where you have the east, west, north, south, up, down, east, west, north, south, which to the Ari is up is Netzach, down is Hod, east is Tiferet, west is Yesod, north is Gvura, and south is Chesed. But there are other tables as well where he kind of does this. The first time he does it, he goes through all the 10 Sfirot, beginning, end, good, evil, up, down, north, south, east, west, as Chachma, Bina, Keter, Malchut, Netzach, Hod, Gvura, Chesed, Tiferet, Yesod. You see, they're not always neatly fitting in. That's why it's kind of hard to do that kind of the matchup. Some of them work really well and some of them don't.
He has evil as Malkut.
Yeah. There's Zohar that says that, the Malchut is often associated with Ragleh Yeredet Mavet. Its legs descend into death. That's where the free choice and the Sitra Achra are manifesting in, for good and for bad. Okay, v'yatzim hem avir mayim eish, and so the outcome of these three letters, they're sealed with the 6 rings, which we're understanding as being these 6 spherot, whether they're Lurianic, Zoharic spherot, or just the way they're described and have to be understood within the framework of the Sefer Yetzirah. That's up to you to decide. But the outcome, or v'yatzu mehem avir mayim eish, air, water, and fire. And then we're going to keep going with what the air, water, and fire, how they turn into our physical universe, or how they become the physical universe we experience. Or you could say the spiritual antecedent that then influences the actualization of those concepts into the physical universe. And then also, because the key to Kabbalah is this concept that there's a direct link, both directions, not just cause and effect in one direction, but also in returning back to the source of from the shoresh, from the source to that which exists as an outcome of something. Okay, so that's how we're seeing these things. These things are the conduits. These letters are the conduits, just like speech is a device to communicate from someone, whoever is the speaker, is the source of that idea being conveyed through the speech. In the Sefer Yetzirah, the speaker is God, and his speech, his letters, are then turning into the listener, who in addition to listening and hearing, and therefore existing, the very existence is coming into being in their listening, because the words are gradually creating what exists. They're also able to respond to the speaker, which is the idea of Nasa Adam B'Tzalmei B'Musenu, that God and the angels, the Sphirot, so to speak, collectively say, let's make Adam and Eve and David and Ben and Zev and Avi in the divine image, so that there's reciprocity between God and humankind. Okay, and to do that, here we have air, water, and fire. And for them are born fathers, and from the fathers descendants. So most people understand that the fathers here, if we're going to understand that let's say air, water, and fire are Keser, Chachma, and Bina. Let's say Keser would be the air, and Chachma would be the water, and I'm sorry, Bina. Let's just say it doesn't matter. Of course it matters, but let's just say Bina would be the water and Chachma would be the fire. And you could say the other way around. But let's just say it for a moment. Just because I want to talk about the next 3. The next 3 would be Chesed, Gvur, Tiferet. So they would be the children. No, I'm sorry, not the children yet. I'm sorry. It's a little Freudian. It's kind of weird. The mothers give birth to the fathers, and then from them comes the children. That's a little weird. Don't take it too weird. But so, in other words, what from Keser, Chachma, Bina, from the first 3 stages of mind comes the first 3 stages of midot, the other next 3 sphirot of kindness, judgment, and mercy, chesed, gvur, tiferet. And then from those 3, which are the fathers, together with the mothers, will then come the descendants, the toldot, which will be netzach, hod, yesod, malchut. Okay. Any questions on that? Again, and that the last thing we said, matching them with sphirot, these are commentaries. Okay. Any questions on number Mishnah 1 or 2? while you guys are thinking, I'll say one more thing, which is kind of a cute thing. I'll read it from the middle of page 142 from the Kaplan. One commentator states that the letters aleph, mem, shin contains the mystery through which one can walk on fire. The reason for this may be because these letters have the power to reconcile opposites. It is possible that Rabbi Zera made use of this technique to prevent his feet from being burnt in fire as related in the Talmud. Now, I'm well aware of the story in the Talmud because I'm giving Talmud classes lately, so that has come up in one of the Talmud classes. A very strange rabbi, Rabbi Zera, I think they used to call him the one whose thigh was singed, because he had this weird practice of, I think it was every month, he wanted to make sure that he wasn't gonna be hurt by the flames of Gehenna. So how would he know? He would go into his furnace, into his oven, and if he wouldn't be burnt by the fire, then he would know he's good. He doesn't have to do tshuva, just keep going the way he was going. And one time he went in and there was another rabbi who was jealous of him, and he somehow distracted him or did something, and the fire singed his thigh, which at face value is it's a weird story. The Talmud is full of weird stories. It's particularly weird. And Aryeh Kaplan, rightfully so, is trying to understand. It seems that Reb Zera was somebody involved in this type of what we call, I think they call it in the Talmud, they don't call it Sefer Yetzirah, but they call it, I think, either Maisa Yetzirah or something with the word Yetzirah in it. And there's stories about creating calves for Shabbos and a golem. So, and Reb Zera is one of the figures in these stories. So therefore, rightfully so, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan is trying to explain that it wasn't just simply some trick, to make sure he's avoiding Gehenna, but it was really some mystical practice that he was doing to overcome fire through, perhaps in Aryeh Kaplan's view, using this aleph, mem, shin as a technique to overcome the fire. I thought it was interesting. Okay, any questions? Okay, we'll go on then. I guess he's saying Keter Chachma Bina would be air, water, and fire. Right, that would be the aleph, shin, and mem. Okay, Mishnah 3. Now, he has another interesting take here that Aryeh Kaplan has with a way of linking this to physics. I'm not a physicist. Aryeh Kaplan actually was a physicist. No, actually, that's Mishnah 4. So we'll talk a little bit about physics, whether we should be using physics as an analogy to understand Sefer Yetzirah, and perhaps we should. And if we should, how do we do that? So Mishnah 3, page 144. Shalosh imos aleph mem shin chakakan chatzvan sarfan shakal hamiran. The three mothers, the aleph, mem, and shin, he engraved them, he carved them, he permuted them. But sarbehem shalosh, he weighed them, he transformed them. But sarbehem shalosh imos aleph, mem, shin ba'olam v'sholosh imos aleph mem shin b'shana, v'sholosh imos aleph mem shin b'nefesh, zachar and nekeva. And with them, he depicted three mothers. The three letters, aleph mem shin, in world or universe, three mothers, those three letters in the year, and the three mothers, those three letters in the soul, male and female. So basically, what we're going to now be doing a lot of is you're going to be hearing. We already heard many times the idea of engraving, carving, permuting, weighing, transforming. The terms, particularly engraving, carving, or permuting, is a term we've already heard many times. Now, what you're going to be hearing again and again, besides for those terms, are in the whatever we're talking about is going to be in the universe, in the year, and in the soul, and male and female. So basically, we're transitioning now towards is there's creation, like the world, right? And there's time, space, and self. That's another way of saying year is time, universe is space, and self is soul. Now, you might make a distinction that when we talk about, let's say, time, we think about time in a linear sense. And perhaps they don't think about time purely in a linear sense. Perhaps it's more of a cyclical. There's a linear element of time that we're going forward. You don't generally go backward. It's not physics says it's not possible. Maybe we'll come up with some, I don't know, wormhole that will make a time travel possible, fold something. I don't know. That'll make us be able to travel great distances through some wrinkle in space, perhaps. I don't know how if that could affect going back in time. I don't think it can, but let's just say, for argument's sake, that perhaps the emphasis that we have on the linear nature of time was not understood by ancients, even our own ancestors, with that same emphasis. And perhaps they saw more in the cycle, the reoccurrence and reemergence of, let's say, spring in the springtime as a sign of the significance of the seasons, as being the reoccurrence of something is perhaps more significant than the direction of time, or equally significant. So there are two kind of parallel elements of time that need to be navigated together. And what we're now talking about is not just the existence of time, but the existence of what we call a cycle of time, what we call a year, a season within a year, and then we're going to get down into the month and the week. So that's most of the rest of Sefer Yetzirah is now breaking down how we go from aleph mem shin, or the 7 doubles, or the 12 elementals, and translate that into the 4 seasons, the 7 days of the week, which also equal the 7 planets, and other significant numbers of 7, and then the 12 is the 12 months of the year. That's going to be the remainder of the Sefer Yetzirah's main emphasis. So now we're going to go into time and space, meaning space is going to be, for example, Aries, right? When we're talking about the month of Nisan, we're not just going to talk about the combination of the letters of God's name. We're also going to talk about the stars in the sky, the Zodiac symbol for that particular time, that month, and a particular part of the body, because it's time, which is the month, the space, which is the Zodiac symbol in the sky, the self, which is the body or a sense in the body. And we're going to make a connection between these 3 things again and again and again. Okay. Any questions on number 3? Number 4. Shalosh Imot aleph mem shin ba'olam avir mayim eish. The 3 mother letters, the aleph, the mem, and the shin. Ba'olam, in the space or universe. So you've got, what are the 3 elements here that the aleph, mem, shin are associated with, create, and how they take on dimensionality or actuality in space are air, that's the aleph, water, that's the mem, and shin, that's the fire. Now, what are they? Aish, fire, shamayim, that is heaven. Now, it's unclear if heaven means spirituality or it means the cosmos or both. Okay, but let's just say it means spirituality. Okay, what is Aish? Aish is fire, it's heat, it's passion. We see the nature of fire is to go up. As people see the fire going up more than going down somehow. I don't know if that's what that represents, but I know what the significance of it here is, that it represents the yearning to go up. It also has a significance in terms of the mental faculty of, like, they understood the mind's working as a certain heat. Now, you could argue, what do you mean? Shamayim, heaven, has the words mayim in it, water in it. So it's a good argument. We could talk about it if we want to. So Shamayim, he says, nivru me'esh, but heaven is created from fire. The aretz nivras mimayim, earth is built from water. So, for example, the Vilna Gaon says, what do you mean? Doesn't it rain from the sky? The Vilna Gaon says, no. The verse says, Genesis, ve'ed yalam in haaretz, the cloud comes up from the earth. In other words, you want to know why we have rain? Because it's provided, it's because of the earth. We have the right planet. That's why there's water on earth. It evaporates and it rains. The avir meruach, and air comes from spirit, machria ben time, and that mediates between the fire, the heavenliness, and water, earthliness. Now, here's where Aryeh Kaplan uses a parable of physics. This, I believe, is his own. He doesn't quote anyone. And the question then becomes, do we as contemporary interpreters or people who want to get the best understanding of the Sefer Yetzirah say, let's continue. Let's go to the, he was a fantastic mind. His understanding of physics is still, even though, despite that he hasn't been around because he passed away a number of years ago, it was still pretty advanced even for today. So, but even so, there's new information since then. So do we now go and try to understand Sefer Yetzirah with physics? I'll give you what he's got. He says you could, this is towards the bottom of 145 of Kaplan, if you want to follow along with me. So on a somewhat deeper physical level, fire, water, and air represent the 3 basic physical forces. Fire is the electromagnetic force through which all matter interacts. The atomic nucleus, however, consists of like positive charges, which would repel each other if only electromagnetism existed. There must therefore exist another force which can bind the nucleus together. This is the strong, quote, the strong nuclear or pionic force which binds the nucleus together, represented by, quote, water. If this nuclear force were to interact with all the particles, however, all matter would be mutually attracted together, forming a solid lump, denser than a neutron star. On the other hand, even within each elementary particle, there is a need for a cohesive force to counteract the electromagnetic repulsion within the particle itself. This force can be neither electromagnetic nor ionic. This is the air, which represents the weak nuclear force, which decides between the two. It is this force that allows light particles such as electrons to exist. So again, there's a question in any Kabbalah that could have been also understood in its time as a kind of science, or whether we reintroduce contemporary understanding of science into it. And it's an open-ended question. I think there's some people, it would require a good understanding, not just of Kabbalah, but also of physics. So something to work on, to think about.
I think it's similar to the question that's asked, not just mystically, but in general, about like the relevance of talking about God in the sense of a king when we don't really know about kings today and we're not used to it. I think it's a similar question of like, well, yeah, we should use the relevant symbols to understand.
Let me ask you something, Zev. Every time we say we're not used to kings, and I agree with you that we think like that, why are we so fascinated with Meghan Markle and Harry, and like what is that about?
Sure. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't use that language. Like I like that.
I'm like,
yeah.
Every time we want to throw away the king metaphor, it just pops back up into our imagination some other way. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure whether we're done with that. Trump wanted to be king. It's not so simple.
Sure. But like I said, I'm not suggesting that we don't use the king analogy, but just.
No, it's a great question. I struggle with that a lot, and I wanted to reevaluate the word, but explain how what we would use today is like a power dynamic, for example, or maybe a misunderstanding of what a king even means. It means we give over our hopes and our thoughts onto whether it's a president or a Rebbe, and make them into something that they're much greater than who they are, because of what we believe in them. So yeah, I agree that it's something that we struggle with in terms of the words and so on. But yeah, it's like anything. How far did we go with reinterpreting things based on the realities that we're experiencing? And a good teacher has to be able to do that, and also has to be able to not lose the connection to the past in the retelling of the story.
Yeah, Kaplan also talks about the 4 classical elements, so he's not losing the ancient science either.
Yeah, he's not doing away with it. He's of course not saying this is stupidity. This is what it means today, and should have, means just this nuclear things, because he also understands that science is constantly updating itself and finding out new theories and testing them and proving them, or getting closer to proving them. And when you link Torah to science, it's usually very short-lived. So that's another thing. If you do start linking Torah to science, are you following the creators of the Sefer Yetzirah, or are you really not doing that? It's a good question, because you're gonna outdate yourself. Like the Rambam, for example, arguably was a scientist. I mean, he was a philosopher, but being a philosopher used to be a scientist. I don't think they had a description of a scientist that wasn't a philosopher.
There's also a doctor. That's applied science.
It's applied science, yeah. So he wrote a book explaining Torah according to science of his time, called the Moreh Nevuchim. It was met with ridicule, and besides for the ridicule, it quickly got dated, meaning its science was tied to a specific time that passed very quickly. And it's just like, yeah, there's some very interesting parts in it, But really, come on, like his whole conception of how to understand physics is not the way we understand things for many years.
I feel like that already happens now when I try to read some Hasidus, if I'm reading Rabbi Nachman or Tanya, and it starts talking about how like the male seed comes from the brain. It's like, okay, we know it doesn't work like that, and I have to sort of shelve. But I know that to them that actually was the scientific reality when they wrote it, and so you have to like see what they're really getting at, because they're not just talking about the body anyway. They're talking about something deeper. So like,
correct. So the question is, how do you reevaluate it every time and use the best current analogy to explain what they're talking about? Or do you say, well, this is how they understood things. Maybe there's some truth on their level. Like, look, the four classic elements, it would, I don't want to make this argument, but let's say Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics can get you to the moon. I don't think they can get you to Mars, but whatever, you can go. I don't know if they can even get you to the moon. But the point is that Einstein and relativity and the physics that follow is not saying that Newton is 1,000% wrong. He just wasn't right, meaning there was things he didn't get. And the same thing will be for Einstein's theories. Eventually, there'll be some bigger theory that will surpass Einstein and make it wasn't that Einstein was some idiot. He'll never be an idiot. There'll be just somebody else who will add something else who will be like, oh, remember that used to be Einstein was, he was the Newton of his time. And that's just the way the world works. That's the way it's going to work. Anyway. The point is that you're gonna have analogies from thousands of years ago. That Galen was like the leading physician. So like what when did they discover germs? 150 years ago or something? Although the Talmud talks about certain things that you have to like, you can't put a coin in your mouth because there's like sweat on it and things like that. The Rambam says that. I think it's the Talmud.
Well,
anyway, let's go further.
In a way, sometimes the fact that you can't like observe certain scientific tangible realities allows you, like way back when, to almost get the real science more accurately. In other words, what I mean is, like, if once you have you have the capability of seeing things at a certain level of minutia, you start to believe that you've gotten to the bottom of it. But if you're a true deep thinker from the get-go, like 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years, if you start thinking about things, you can get to like a digital world, even if, because you're not confused by some of the tangible science that suggests, okay, I've gotten to the, to bedrock, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what you're saying, Ben, is that once we have tools, scientific techniques, and abilities to like see things that are, for example, the example you were giving was invisible to the naked eye, we could then make the mistake that we've run the course of whatever there is to know.
Yeah.
And those before that time, people knew they didn't know, so they speculated beyond what they might speculate today, and certainly that might be the case.
Yeah, like a medrash that, let's say, like Adam's like sees from the beginning of the world to the end of the world. It's very possible that a deep thinker way back then could get to the bottom of augmented reality and virtual reality and augmented intelligence and internet and all that kind of stuff, because they don't have phone lines. So it's like, we may have had an intermediate step where we're like, okay, the science is limited by, I don't know, certain types of waves, right? I don't know, sound waves or microwaves. And it turns out that once you get down into the much more molecular, atomic, solid, right, much more minutia, and then ultimately that's what we're discovering always in science, is like there's actually much more refined, nuanced, catalytic things and pathways that we just never observed because we got stuck at higher level, physicality, and there's even lower level stuff. That's
Yeah.
my little technology nugget for the day.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that. Good. Okay, so we have the answer. We just didn't know it. So maybe we got to take Sefer Yetzirah more seriously, Ben, is what you're saying. Just in case.
For sure.
So let's go to Mishnah 5, page 148. Sholosh imos aleph mem shin b'shana chom kor v'revaya. Chom niver me'esh, kor niver me'mayim, v'revaya meruach machria b'intayim. Three mothers, the aleph mem shin, in the year are the heat, the hot weather, the cold, and the temperate. Those are the three seasons that will really turn into four, as we'll see. The hot is created from fire, the cold is from water, and the temperate from breath deciding between them. So if you think about so right now we're coming out of winter into spring. So that would be, what would that be? That would be, winter would be water because it's cold. We say mashiv haruach umarid hageshem. The water comes down, and as the Vilna Gaon says, the water goes up from the earth just to come down. And he actually says that in the spring we stop saying mashiv haruach umarid hageshem. We say morid hatal. So the tal comes down because that is coming from the sky, because the machriya is the intermediary between winter and the summer, is the aleph, is the spring. And then once we're going to go into summer, and then we're going to come out of summer, but we don't go straight into winter. We have another machriya, we have another intermediary between heat of summer, which is the shin, which is the fire, and the cold of winter, which is again the aleph. So we have three letters and three temperatures: hot, cold, and in between. So in that sense, the spring and the fall are the same, except one's going from the cold to the warm, to the heat, spring, and one is going from the heat to the cold, fall. There's a lot on the word revaya, kosi revaya, that's Psalm 23:5. It's in the Kaplan. And again, we were just talking about the idea of the cycle of time revisiting itself, meaning instead of just the focus being on the linear nature of time, we're talking now about the breakdown of time into four seasons. That's the template coming from these three letters. And we'll go straight into Mishnah 6 on page 150. Sholosh imos aleph mem shin b'nefesh zachar nekeva rosh ubeten via. The three mothers, aleph mem shin, in the soul, meaning in the person, both physical and spiritual, male and female. Again, we're always going to be using male and female, masculine, feminine, are the head, belly, and chest. Rosh nivra me'esh ubeten nivra me'mayim v'gvia meruach machria b'intayim. The head is created from fire, and again, that's parallel to Shemayim. That's the shin, which are the three avot, the three, well, actually not really the fathers here, but usually we associated that with Chachma and Bina and Keter, okay? Keter would be the machriya, would be the intermediary, the aleph. And then the belly, which here in the Kaplan in figure 42, it would be Netzach and Hod, and the machriya, the intermediary between them is the chest, which is Tiferet. Chesed word Tiferet, the chest is Tiferet. From breath decides between them. If you think about it, the belly is the seat of desire. I mean, not really, but desire, at least for food, Jewish desire. So it also has intuition in it. So Aryeh Kaplan brings down that the belly could represent Chachma, and the head could represent Bina, interestingly enough. So the Bina could be fire, and the Aish, the Avir, the Tiferet, the breathing. Via is a strange word, doesn't always mean chest, usually either means body or it can mean the male organ in certain contexts. But here, most of the commentaries say it means the chest. Okay, now we go to Mishnah 7. It's on page 152 in the Kaplan. Himlich os aleph beruach v'keshelo keser v'tzarfen zeh b'zeh v'tzar behem avir ba'olam v'rivaya b'shona v'gviyah b'nefesh zachar b'alef mem shin v'nekeva ba'alef shin mem. He made the letter aleph king over breath. Okay, now remember, we have this idea of the value of the aleph and it being the breath. And now he's going to say this himlich ot aleph. This is a phrase we're going to come up with again and again. He crowned. Now the crowning could simply mean it's now we have three significant letters, but we need one to be the crown. You can't have three kings. Sounds like a movie, Three Kings. Maybe it is a movie. But you need to have one king over the three. So for this particular context, the aleph is king. He crowned the aleph over spirits. So in the context of the spirit, in this context of the kashalo kasev v'tzarfen zeh, and he tied it, he bound it to a crown, and he combined them with one another, and he formed air in the universe, temperate in the year, chest in the soul, and male with aleph mem shin, and female with aleph shin mem. Remember, we said there's 6 different ways to spell this word. So here's male and female is aleph mem shin versus aleph shin mem. So Mishnah 8, I'm sorry. Himlich os mem b'mayim b'kasher lo keser v'tzarfen zeh b'zeh v'tzar b'hem eretz b'olam v'kar b'shana v'beten b'nefesh zachar b'mem ayin shin v'nekeva b'mem shin ayin. Now he makes the mem king over water. So basically, if you're talking about spring, you know who's king? Aleph is king. You know who's king? Avir is king, because aleph is avir. Aleph is land. And here's how you spell out what part of the body is that? The chest. How do we spell out the 3 letters? For Zachar, aleph mem shin. For Nekeva, aleph shin mem. What about winter? That's Mishnah 8. Himlich os mem b'mayim. For the cold time of year, the winter time, he crowns the mem with water. He binds them with one another. Eretz ba'olam, and that's associated with earth. The kar b'shana and cold winter. Ubetem b'nefesh, in the belly, in the person. Zachar b'ma'ash, nekeva b'masa, or masha. Masha is the name of interesting name. In the male mem aleph shin, and in the female mem shin aleph. Okay, fascinating. So here we have this concept here that we're now going from the letters to like actualize them in our real time and in our real bodies. So somehow the energy of winter is within the stomach. Now that makes a lot of sense if you think about it from a survival perspective. What do you need to do? You need to fill your stomach in the winter because there's no food. So like, you know, to make up for the fact that it's hard to go pick from your vegetable garden in the middle of the winter, you need to take care of your stomach. That's just this casual, you know, simple reality that we face throughout history. And yet here we are explaining how the earthliness of the winter and the materialism that represents, the need to sustain ourselves during the winter with food and shelter, is the power of the mem and the water. Okay, all of these things have all three letters, but the dominance of the letter, the crown of the letter means its dominance. And the final Mishnah of Parak Gimel, the third chapter, Mishnah 9, page 155, Himlich os shin be'esh v'kasher lo keser. He made Shin the king over fire and tied it with a crown, but Sarf and Bazu, and combined them one with another. But Sarbehem Aish, in the parentheses, Shomayim ba'olam b'chom b'shana v'rosh b'nefesh zachar b'shin aleph mem b'nekeva b'shin mem aleph. And with them he formed heaven and the universe, fire or heat, meaning summer in the year, and the head in the soul, and the male with shin aleph mem, and the female with shin mem aleph. So we now have here is we now have all four seasons. We only have three letters, but combined, they represent all four seasons. They represent masculine and feminine within the context of all those four seasons. They represent three distinct parts of the body and three distinct characters of fire, water, air. And then what we will be doing as we go into chapter 4, which is not for tonight, we're done for tonight, other than just to say we're going to continue going into the letters, and then we're going to start talking about the 7, which is the 7 days of the week, but there are many other significances of 7. And then in the chapter after that, we're going to go into more than just the 7. We're going to go eventually into the Zodiac signs of the months. So we're really now, even though there is the commentaries that say we're getting more, the Sphirot are becoming stronger. It could also be that the physical world, the relationship between the spiritual world and the actual world are becoming stronger as the chapters progress in the Sefer Yetzirah. And as it becomes not just a conceptual concept of Sphirot, of the Sefer Yetzirah's version of Sphirot and the 22 letters and the breakdown of the 22 letters and the soul and so on, but how that is a real thing in Olam Shana Nefesh, in real time, real space itself. How real the real is, again, that's kind of what we're talking about, what to do with contemporary understanding of these things. And that's a question, just a question that people are doing some of, but maybe not comfortable doing more of than whatever their comfort level of interpreting things based on information we have now and understanding the world at large.